Town Hall. Welcome everyone. My name is Peter Burrows. I am the superintendent of Addison Central. And with me are a number of key folks that are going to be here to answer questions. So to start out, let's do introductions. I'll just say your name and you can tell folks who you are and your position in ACSD. Mary.
Thanks, Peter. Mary Cullinane, Chair of School Board.
Victoria.
Victoria Jetty, Vice Chair of the School Board.
Vicki.
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Caitlin.
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Brittany.
Brittany Gilman, Business Manager.
Kelly.
Kelly Landwehr, MUHS Lead School Nurse and ACSD Lead Nurse and ACSD COVID-19 Coordinator.
Anything else?
That's it.
That's enough, I think, don't you? Justin.
Justin Campbell, I'm the high school principal.
Jen.
Jen Kravitz, I'm the principal at Mary Hogan.
And Heather.
I'm Heather Robb. I'm the principal at Cornwall.
Awesome. Well, thank you all, and thanks all attendees who are here today. The format for today's town hall, we thought just given the number of folks that we think will be attending, we have a moderator, Brittany Gilman, who introduced herself earlier. She's going to be in the Q&A section. So if you look on your screen and you kind of pan over the grid, you'll see the bar on the bottom come up and it says Q&A in the middle. So if you have a question for any of us, you can put the question in the Q&A. Brittany's going to be getting all of those questions from all of you. She's going to try to consolidate some of them. If there are a number of questions around the same topic, she'll try to pick one that kind of speaks to all of them. And hopefully we can get to all of your questions. As we mentioned previously in communications, this is a time to ask questions about school reentry, about all of the ACSD board work that's going on. Certainly there's a ton going on. There's a lot changing. We realize that it's really, really important for all of us to stay connected and be working together to solve many of the challenges that we're facing this year. It's a really unusual year, as you all know. School is starting very soon on September 8th. And so we're going to continue to do these kinds of town halls, and we'll be continuing to do our Friday communication as we get started so that we're all working together and supporting each other. With that, I am going to hand it off to our moderator, Brittany, to find our first question.
Okay. So the first question, excuse me, could be directed at the board or perhaps Peter, and it is, does the master plan include decreasing staff across the district?
So I think I can probably answer that. Yes, it does. When you look at scale and you look at, I mean, depending on what you're talking about, obviously, the board is looking currently at a 3-school model and a 4-school model. So if you're talking about the elementary school study, which is a part of the facilities master plan, it would, in that you're going from, if you go from 7 schools down to 3 schools, the scale changes. And currently, when you look at small school enrollment, where you could have a class of 8, you could have a class of 12, you could have a class of 5, you could have a class of 20. The range is all over. So when you look at taking all of those schools and putting them into 3 schools, there is a reduction in staff, and that is reflected in the data that we presented to the board in our last facilities committee meeting.
Follow up to that question, specifically about the student-teacher ratio. which is, does that include increasing the student-teacher ratio?
It doesn't make changes to our current student-teacher ratio in terms of what we currently have in many classrooms. It does equalize. So that's the difference between where we are now and what the, again, if we're talking here about a 3-school model, it does equalize, as I mentioned, combining a class of 5 in one town with a class of 8 in another town and splitting another class into 2, the class sizes could go up to 20 students in each class. That isn't unusual. Most of our schools have at least one class around 20 or over 20. So that is a current norm.
Okay, the next question is probably for administration. It says, can you speak in some detail about the plan to move from a hybrid schedule to a 5-day in-person schedule? For example, this could involve Justin, for high schoolers, where their schedule change at that point, and would we truly be in person 5 days, or would we remain closed on or remote on Wednesdays?
Do you want to start, Peter?
I can probably start because I think I can help pass it off to you.
Okay.
Because this is right in my brain. So the process we're going to go through to determine if we're ready for fully in person, and we haven't determined what the schedule looks like for fully in person, but we predict, and the conversation I think statewide is 5 days a week, not 4 days a week. The criteria that we're going to use is looking at COVID data in Addison County to determine, and this is working directly with the Vermont Department of Health and the Agency of Education to determine if the conditions support coming back fully. We're starting currently in step 2. The state has 3 steps in during the COVID-19 pandemic that kind of outline the degrees of severity in terms of limitations. Step 1 is fully remote. Step 2 is somewhere in the middle. And step 3 is fully in person with a lot of guidelines to support health and safety. We're starting this, the whole state is starting in step 2. We predict we'll move to step 3. They're saying within the first couple of weeks, but they're not sure. They're going to wait and see what happens and look at the data. So in 4 to 6 weeks, ACSD, along with districts throughout our regional area, which is Addison, Chittenden, and Franklin counties, are going to be looking at the data. We're going to also be sure that we can staff our schools. We are concerned currently about the ability to fully staff all of our schools. Our sublists are down. This is not unique to us. This is common across the state, as you can imagine. And so we'll be assessing that too. And as a public institution, we also will take directives, obviously, from the state. So if the state orders or provides a directive to us to move in one direction or another, we will do that as well. So specifics in terms of schools, Justin, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We've built a number of different schedules, and if we came back in person more to a greater degree than we are currently, the schedule would change a bit. But really, the nuts and bolts of our schedule is really built on an alternating day, an odd even day calendar, and so we are pretty flexible there. I think some key questions that would impact our decision is if we came back full time, can we utilize the cafeteria? If not, we would continue with our advisory sort of breakout for the lunch scenario. Otherwise, we could be more flexible. But I think as we've built our hybrid schedules, we've always maintained a focus on flexibility, so that if we become more remote or more in person, we're able to adjust as needed.
Jen, Heather, do you want to talk from the elementary level?
Sure. So our schedule would be largely the same if if and hopefully when we come back in person. We built our arts and movement schedule, at least at Mary Hogan this year, really thinking about that. It's going to look a little different, but we're going to have the same arts and movement schedule during hybrid as if we came back in person. And we've also had lots of special education meetings for students who qualify for special education, so that we're planning for those services now if we're back in person, if we're in the hybrid and remote. So it doesn't feel like too much of the schedule would change if we come all back.
I can echo a lot of what both Jen and Justin just said. We have planned a schedule that's actually very similar to schedules from past years that we're able to do in hybrid, and we'll be able to adapt if we're all in person. One thing, unlike Mary Hogan, that would change is that the arts and movement teachers at the rural elementary schools are scheduled on a rotating basis, alternating weeks in schools. And so we would have to look at that when we come back fully in person and whether that would continue or that would change. But if it changes, it would be just a little bit of a change to the schedule, like a tweak. The bulk of the schedule would remain the same.
Okay, the next question is for administration. How will teachers at the middle school be given the resources, especially time in this challenging school year, to plan for the restructuring of MUMS to accept sixth graders next year?
So that's something that we're obviously keenly aware of, and we are so grateful that as the decision was being made a year ago, when we were thinking about, is this a 1-year move or a 2-year move? And I think we were going back and forth, and Chris came forward and said, really to do this well, we need to do this over 2 years. So one, I'm grateful that right now we're not making this transition going into this current year, and that we have another year to plan for that. A lot of that work over the past year has, in terms of what the model looked like, I know the staff has gone through a number of different iterations of looking at what could it look like, and that work will continue this year. So Chris, who is on a leave of absence, is continuing to stay connected to that work that she began last year. Chris Frankward, the principal of MUMS. So that's going to be a priority. We will take and we will make whatever time we need to make sure that both the operational side of things and the instructional side of things is figured out. I think we're going to be challenged this year in general in terms of planning, and while there's a lot going on and there's probably a lot of transition ahead for all of us, I think we're also pretty keenly aware that we're not going to just be reacting to present moment, but we're also going to be using this time and the objectivity that I think has come with kind of pressing pause on our normal lives to really kind of to look ahead and vision in a way that we didn't do previously. So I think it's just something that we're committed to. We're going to fully support, and we're going to make the time where we need to make sure that it's a celebration when the sixth graders come to MUMS.
Okay, the next question is health related, so probably for Kelly. With asymptomatic cases known to be approximately 1/3 of all cases, can you detail what discussions have taken place regarding testing of students, staff, or faculty? If discussions have happened, why isn't testing being implemented? And if it hasn't been discussed, why not?
So really good question. One I've answered quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. So the State of Vermont COVID-19 Task Force for School Reentry and the Vermont Department of Health don't recommend routine COVID testing for staff and students prior to entering school. And the reason for this is it's not an effective screening tool, because the test only determines an individual's positive or negative status at that moment in time. So I always give the example, I could leave here tonight, go get tested, and then 48 hours later, I find out that I'm negative, but then tomorrow morning I could be in contact with someone who's COVID positive and become infected. And so it's just that moment in time. So for that to be an effective screening tool, we would all have to be tested really on a daily basis. So it's a really good question. In a perfect world, we would know everyone's status on any given day, because the asymptomatic carrier is certainly a concern, but it's just not an effective screening tool. And this is why we have all of these mitigation and infection control strategies in place. And all of these things together will help us, give us the best chance of staying safe. But this is just, unfortunately, testing is not a valid tool for us.
Okay, we have a few questions here about remote learning. So specifically, what do students do? What will it look like on the days when they're learning remotely? Will they be live streaming into the classroom? Will they be attending at the high school level the same classes virtually that they would on in-person days? So maybe some principals.
So as far as students live streaming in, only if that is, by the teacher's determination, the right way to access students at that time. We won't generally be expecting teachers to connect for long virtual meetings in a hybrid model like we did in the past. And live streaming into an active classroom is really challenging technically to balance. So if there's a really good reason to bring students into a live stream, that might be an option, but it won't be dictated from the school or district that would happen. I would say that a lot of the learning will be on this, defined by the teachers, but on the students' own time. So there's quite a lot of flexibility about how the scheduling works. And it'll look different from classroom to classroom and school to school. So I'll let the principals pick it up in a moment, but let me just add this, last spring we had relatively reduced instructional time to just cope with the crisis. At this point, our teachers are designing a full educational experience. And so the idea is that we're providing students with not only math and literacy, but also the arts and PE and many of the same engagements that they would experience at school. It will take a different shape at home.
Justin, would you like to talk about what that might look like at the high school, and then we can have some input from the elementary schools?
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with what Caitlin said. I think it will vary a bit class to class at the high school, but definitely it's going to end up being a mix. There will be some synchronous experiences. I think the focus though really has been with our teachers and thinking about a blended experience and thinking about how do you as a teacher, now that you have some students sitting in your room a fraction of the time, some students at home, some students fully at home, how do you build that community and build that learning environment that we all prize? And so I think our teachers are doing a good job at thinking strongly about remote as a starting place and coming up with learning that really changes the paradigm a bit. So instead of an adult standing in front of the class and kind of lecturing, it's really thinking about activities that can be much more independent and where the learning community can be engaged. And we interact with each other differently in this environment, but we still build that community. We're working together in small groups and in whole groups sometimes, and we're able to together learn the content and skills. So there's a lot of focus there going. I think more specifically for the high school, you are going to see some synchronous sessions. I don't think you're going to see many back-to-back 80-minute synchronous sessions. That probably is not sustainable with our limitations on technology and access there. And just practically, coming into a discussion, it maybe sounds like a good idea. When you try to execute it, it's really difficult to bridge those physical and electronic interfaces. So certainly some synchronous learning experiences, but much more focus on kind of flipping the classroom, giving students access to materials and more open-ended independent projects to dive into in small groups and on their own.
Great. Jen or Heather, would you like to talk about that at the elementary level?
Jen, I'll go. And actually, I think either one of us could talk because this is something that the principals, the elementary principals have been meeting together to talk about quite often. So we've been talking about it, and then teachers have been working on grade level teams to talk about it. And part of what Justin said transfers to the elementary level, and that is that teachers will be planning for remote instruction for all first. And one thing we've been careful to discern between is the difference between a learning opportunity and a learning experience. So all students, all of the elementary students within a class will be presented with the same learning opportunities. Some of them are going to be on-site in person. Some of them are going to be off-site hybrid, and some of them are going to be off-site fully 100% remote. So the experience of that learning opportunity, how the students participate in it, if they're fully remote, will be different than how they will participate if they're on-site learning with their classmates and teacher, but the opportunities will be the same. They'll be presented with materials to learn the same types of content, whether it's how to hone questions in a transdisciplinary unit or math exercises. Jen, did you want to add to that?
I think that really did explain how we're thinking about things as an elementary group. I think the other piece that's important, and I'm sure it's true to some extent at the high school, but for sure it's true at the elementary school, is thinking about how we start every year. Like we start every year by focusing on connection and routine and process and procedure and building that classroom community, because that's the foundational work that you can lean on later in the year. And that feels more important this year than ever, just because we're going to have students in one class who are coming two different sets of days or not at all. And so I think it's really important that we recognize, I think one of the questions I saw on the side was, what happens if my kid's a Thursday, Friday kid, and like what happens the first couple days? And the teachers will be communicating with you about what's happening, but it may not be, here's the math lesson and go to it. It may be, think about setting up your workspace for at home. This is what a writing space looks like for a professional writer. What does your space look like? What do you need? Or thinking about, like in the second grade, beetle glyphs. And that's a lot about who we are as people and as learners. So those are the things that we're thinking about. We're also thinking about, what's developmentally appropriate for being on a computer, and really trying to get kids doing things that are not necessarily always tied to a computer.
Okay, we're on the topic of remote, so I'm gonna keep on that. There are a few more questions about it. What kinds of support and structure will be provided for students to help them take responsibility for their remote learning? And then I think a similar question is, what would be helpful in the hybrid model from parents in supporting students and teachers? And that could be for administration or principals.
I think that support and structure in the remote learning, like that feels like exactly what we do at the beginning of the year, is thinking about what is it that you need to learn, how do you do things. And so we're going to be having to think about that, not just in our classroom, but also at home. So those supports and structures will be built not all in a day, but in a gradual manner. And I think that the same is true for how we're going to support kids in how do you log on to the computer? How do you get to the learning management system? How do you do all these things? Those are going to be step by step, and also thinking about digital citizenship. And then I think for parents, it would be, from my end, it feels really important that you're in communication with the teacher, because we're doing this for the first time. And so knowing what your experience is like, because we design things hoping that we're hitting it perfectly. And that may be the case, and that's helpful to know. And then if we need to make adjustments, that's also helpful to know.
Anybody else on that topic?
I think
Heather?
at the elementary level, support from parents could really look like helping students figure out a schedule at home, but also a schedule for transitioning, or a routine is more a better word for it, a routine for transitioning back and forth to school. One thing that teachers will be doing at the elementary level is providing some tangible work, so work that students can carry home with them and do, not just computer work. So helping students figure out how best to do that, and helping them come up with a routine so that they remember to take things, because they're not coming every day. So the routine is going to be different. And if teachers can help with that process, like Jen said, reaching out and communicating to teachers or communicating to principals, so that we can help figure that out with you if you need the support.
I think the other piece that I would add in terms of parents supporting at home, similar to when you think about homework, can you set aside a space within your home that's the student's space to go to when it's the school day or during the school day, so that they can access their learning, and setting that up with whatever they need at that point in time, whether it's pens, pencils, markers, whatever, textbooks, whatever they need.
Justin, do you want to talk about the high school and what structure looks like at that level?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities. I think making sure that helping students to have a routine, our teachers will be focusing on this as well. It's, I think the morning is particularly important. Some of our feedback from the spring that we've received, a lot of students were waking up in the afternoon kind of thing. So setting that routine and kind of getting in the habit of doing school, though, we have kind of multiple versions of school, is really important. We'll be sending out regular Google forms for feedback from students and parents. And I think I would echo what Jen and others have said. The communication is critical. But for those 3 days to start the year, when we don't see students physically in front of us, those eyes need to be the parents. And so closing that communication loop, we're going to be reaching out regularly. We have the ambassador program, so there'll be connections there. We'll be pushing out Google polls, et cetera, to think about programmatically how are we doing. But if things are getting in the way, don't be bashful. Let us know. We're happy to. We've done lots of planning, but I think we're happy to be flexible as well and try to troubleshoot as best we can. So I would echo what others have said.
One important message for parents, for guardians to communicate to students is that this remote learning model, whether it's hybrid or fully remote, is not the same one that we had in the spring. So as we mentioned before, last spring we really reduced the instructional time, and we reduced some of the accountability on students to complete the work. And we feel strongly, both at the state level and the local level, that we can't sustain that and keep students up to speed on their learning. And so we need to provide a full education, and that will require more investment from students this year than it did last spring. So just starting to prepare students for that, I think is pretty important at this point.
Okay, a couple more questions on the path of remote, and then we'll switch gears. But I think it makes sense to stay on this since some of the questions really are piggybacking off each other. Somebody mentioned the ambassador program, and somebody asked a question about how schools are going to support peer-to-peer connections for children who are attending on different days and different classes than their friends. It's probably a question for principals.
So I can jump in. At the high school level, there's a variety of different levels at which I would answer that question. So there are things happening in our athletic program and throughout our co-curricular activities to pull students in. Our teachers are spending a lot of time thinking about from the academic perspective, where are there ways, and I shared an example earlier at the high school specific meeting. I was talking with a couple of science teachers who were talking about how they might structure labs. So there's one partner is in person, the other partner is remote, and they're interacting, and they obviously have different roles. And then in that hybrid model, in the first lab, one person would be in person, and then that would flip flop for the second lab. So I think there's a lot of thought going into how we can build connections across our hybrid remote and our fully remote students. So I think this is there's a lot of thought going on out there, but we have to do more. Our SEL, social emotional learning, is a real focus this year across the district. We had training in some of our first leadership meetings that Dr. Burrows organized this year. We had training ourselves, so that's definitely a focus. And the adults who work in this building and in all of our buildings, they want to see students and start interacting with them again in sort of a real way, both academically and socially and emotionally. So.
Okay, and then lastly, about remote for now, what percentage of the district is opting for fully remote? And then what is the schedule like for signing up for that in the future? And how did the sign up work this past time? Caitlin, you might know the answer to that. How did people sign up to be fully remote, and what will that look like in the future this year?
I actually think that I'm not the best person to answer that question, because we collected survey data early on to gauge sort of the general metrics, and then we did the official signing up at the school level. So I think
okay,
answer better what the status of that is at this point.
Okay, Jen.
So at least at Mary Hogan, we sent out a message saying that parents needed to, I think Peter sent one out saying that parents needed to note to the school if they were choosing the remote only option by the 19th. And we followed up with families who on the survey had indicated that they were going to be remote, but we hadn't heard from at that point. It was only a few families. There's still some movement both into remote. There's like one family that's choosing to go from in-person to remote, and one family is choosing to go from remote to in-person at this point. But at Mary Hogan, it's just about 9% of the students at Mary Hogan are fully remote. In some grades, it's 1 or 2 students, and in other grades, it's a few more.
And how often are we going to provide the opportunity to move from a hybrid model or a fully in-person model to fully remote?
That's a great question for Peter.
So currently at the secondary level, the conversation is around quarters in terms of coming back. So if you elect remote now, and that's to help to prepare to bring students back and to be kind of working with the remote students in a way that kind of allows them to finish some of that kind of work remotely and then make the transition back. We obviously understand that there are challenges that people face too, and so we're also working, as with I think many things during the pandemic, we're working on a lot of things on a case-by-case basis as well. So we're trying to be flexible at the same time that we're trying to create structure.
So we're aiming for quarterly because that's easier for us to manage transitions. But we're also, as we described earlier, we're planning our instruction for remote accessibility first, because we know that students, even if they mean to be on site 2 days a week, when they have COVID-like symptoms, which is a long list of symptoms, will be home. And they'll be home for a day or 2 at a time, or longer. And if they're exposed and need to quarantine, it's 2 weeks at a time. So really, we're designing so that students can become remote at any moment, unanticipated, and still benefit from a full education from us. So we're trying to be very, very flexible in our instructional design for that reason.
Okay. There was
one other thing I just wanted to say. Are you moving on from remote now?
I was going to. You're not supposed to interrupt the moderator.
I know. I wanted to add one thing about remote.
Okay, I'll allow it.
I mean, I just wanted to say that I think, and we're seeing this over the last few weeks as we get ready for school, that this is really challenging. Planning remotely, teaching in person, and having a cadre of students fully remote. So, you know, essentially as a teacher, if you think about this, you have 3 different groups in some ways that you're working with every day. It's not something any teacher has gone to school for. It's something that we're responding to significant health and safety challenges and doing our best to create a system that works the best that it can. And we do understand the challenges it puts on families and on the community as well. So our goal, obviously, which I mentioned earlier, is to, if conditions stay strong in Vermont, we are super hopeful that we can bring students back, and you know, fully in person is where we want to be. At the same time, we have stated, and you know, I think our whole community is behind health and safety is the first priority. So we'll be balancing those educational and social and emotional needs of students and families with their health and safety.
Okay. I'm going to move that we can come back to this, but some people have asked questions and been waiting a while on a different topic. This meeting is being recorded by MCTV, and when we get the link to the recording, we will post it on the website. So someone was asking about that. This next question is a health question. Will elementary students need to wear masks outside at recess? Will there be mask breaks? And then how much outside time will students get?
So yes, if students are outside at recess and they are able to remain appropriately socially distanced, they can take their masks off. If students are playing games where they are going to come within what is recommended as far as distancing, then they do need to keep a mask on. So it does vary depending on the distancing is really the piece that matters. If a group is outside and sitting and just hanging out, they can definitely take masks off if they are physically distanced. And as far as mask breaks, yes, there will be many opportunities for a mask break throughout the day, not only just in elementary, but straight through high school. Teachers will be implementing mask breaks into the day. The rule for masks is that students do need to wear masks while inside at all times, even if they're socially distanced. They can take masks off to take a drink, take some bites of a snack, and also during lunch, of course, students will take masks off. And then when they're outside, they can have a mask off as long as they're distanced. And then as far as outside time, I think probably across the board, and principals can speak more to this, but I think students are going to see more of the outside than they ever have before this year, which is awesome. And we've got tents going up, and so students are going to be able to go outside with teachers, rain or shine, and I think a lot of the teachers are really excited about that option, and it's the best place for everyone to be considering COVID-19. So lots of outside time across the board.
Great.
And there was an FAQ that came out today from the state that articulated and described how like the separation inside, outside, that there are times outside beyond 6 feet when students can take off a mask. So we will be, you know, as we get further updates, I just wanted to mention that Kelly has been doing an amazing job of keeping us abreast of all of the different changes, and they're happening daily. So as we get those updates, we'll be sharing them with student, staff, and families so that we're all aware of any kinds of changes to health and safety that we all need to be aware of.
Can I ask a quick question regarding the masks? One that I've heard, not one that I'm reading here tonight, but one that I've heard from parents. Is that all right, Ms. Moderator?
Type it in the Q&A. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I've heard from people this is mostly at the middle and high school levels, although I imagine it's true through elementary, from people whose children have partaken in summer sports, soccer, baseball, lacrosse, who were issued masks for to and from practice and that sort of thing, but did not have to wear them while practicing or during games or tournaments or what have you. And so the move to have all students wear masks during sports practices was a surprise to these people. And I wondered if there's sort of what the thinking behind that was. As far as I know, there was not reported like a surge or something associated to summer sports. And I just wondered, Kelly, maybe you could speak a little bit to, you know, what the thinking was behind that.
Yeah, so the new guidance that came out as far as sports did include that masks were required. So we're really just following the latest guidance. And I honestly am not sure what the summer guidance looked like. It must have not included that masks were required in certain circumstances, which surprises me, honestly. But I wasn't as on top of that information. But any new updates would include that the masks are required. Yeah, so we'll follow anything that's the most updated.
I would also add to that that there are a number of different agencies working on guidelines at the state level, and sometimes the communication across some of these groups isn't as stellar as it maybe could be. So there is also, you know, like the approach to, if you look at the approach to summer across other things too, if you look at, you know, kind of like the numbers for childcare or the guidelines for camps, or those sometimes exist completely outside of a group that's working on how are we going, the health and the safe and healthy start guidelines that we're using to start school. So sometimes these groups are not the same group, and there's the continuum sometimes isn't always clear.
This question is for Peter. What are the timelines or metrics that are being discussed to move to more in-person time? And are we looking at those at a county level or at a state level?
So this has been, I guess, for me as a superintendent, somewhat of a frustration as I've looked across the country, not necessarily Vermont, but across the country at other districts and other states in terms of what kind of outline they're providing to school districts to make decisions around, you know, being in school, being hybrid, being remote. The guidance in Vermont continues to evolve, and so currently superintendents are to make a determination around whether we're fully in person or not. We are supposed to be working directly with the Department of Health. There are, however, no metrics to say specifically when the case rate is X, then you should go to hybrid or you should go to remote. It's more situational in terms of as I mentioned, kind of in terms of the criteria that we're using to make a transition to in-person. We really need to be kind of having an ongoing conversation around spread and, you know, is there a spike in terms of cases? Is staffing a concern? If we have, you know, half of a school quarantining, that makes it really hard to have school because that quarantine would involve staff and students. So I think it's going to be, unfortunately, it's more of a situational thing. And I think it is county-wide. It's also beyond our county, but I would say county-wide is the right circumference in thinking about the COVID data and what we'll be looking at. We fortunately are close to a lot of resources with Middlebury College. They're doing a ton of work and are doing a great job at preparing for their start, which is happening as we speak. And we are part of a group that's working with them to look at the Addison County data. That includes the town of Middlebury. It includes Porter as well. So we'll be continuing to assess all angles, again, working directly with the Department of Health, and then making a determination from there. And I think it's been mentioned already, but communication is going to be incredibly important, and we are really committed to providing everything we do know to all of you so that we all have the same information.
And Peter, a follow-up question to that is, has there been any discussion about schools with smaller class populations moving to more frequent in-person days on a different timeline than buildings who have a higher student count?
So the hybrid start, you know, and this question has come up, I think, a lot. The hybrid start and having students come in smaller groups, we knew going in that our numbers were kind of all over the place across the district. That's true. We couldn't even make a decision by one school because some schools have some small classes and some have, like within the school, second grade might be 9, but third grade might be 19. So because we knew that hybrid was going to be a short time period, because we knew we had a lot to learn in terms of health and safety and really kind of nailing down systems and procedures to be prepared for what we think will be a year of potential transitions. We decided that instead of trying to pick apart, and what we eventually realized is we'd probably have to be moving students around if we wanted to try to really maximize that. And that didn't seem logistically possible nor prudent, given that we don't expect to be in hybrid for a long period of time. So for those reasons, we decided that staying hybrid, staying together, even though there are those issues of there's a small class in different schools, if we stayed in hybrid longer, and as I said, I don't think that's where we're going to head, but if that did happen, then we would definitely revisit that if we were looking at something long term. But right now, our hybrid start is not, we're not thinking this is long term.
Okay, this is a tech/curriculum question. Will there be ongoing tech support for the remote platforms such as ManageBack and Toddle for families, apart from what teachers can realistically provide?
Well, we're really excited that this year we filled our tech integration specialist position. It's a half-time position. We could certainly use time and a half in that role, but it was empty for a couple of years, so that's a huge help. Our new tech integration specialist has already been doing a lot of work to support teachers in learning the learning management platforms, both Toddle and ManageBack, that they'll need to provide instruction. And in the rush of trying to learn so many new things, we've extended some of those timelines for implementation to give teachers really time to get the support that they need. We're planning some training sessions for students in a couple of weeks out. Once we're a little bit more comfortable with the software ourselves, we're planning some training sessions for parents to introduce them to these tools that we're using. So yes, we have more tech support than we have had in recent years, and we see this as a pretty important priority. So we'll be giving it quite a lot of attention and energy this year.
Peter, you're unmuted. Does that mean you have something to add? Or are you just...
I always do, but no, I'm
okay.
just...
Okay, another curriculum question specific to the IB experience in reference to number of students in a classroom. So some classrooms may only have 4 to 6 students in the hybrid model. Has it been discussed how to improve the experience in these classes from an academic and social standpoint, particularly from the IB curriculum lens? Principals or Caitlin?
So I think that our from an IB lens, our teachers have really been diving deeply into collaboration over the past few years. So they're certainly putting heads together. As a previous teacher myself, as a high school English teacher, I really understand how limited a class conversation can become when there are very few students in a classroom. And so that will require our teachers to really practice new skills to keep conversation vibrant and alive in these reduced contexts. It also gives teachers a lot of opportunity to tailor their instruction and their support for students. So I would say probably quite a lot of conversations are happening about that topic among many others, but they're happening largely among educators, teachers on these at the elementary level, grade level teams, and at the secondary level, departmental teams who come together regularly to collaborate around how best to provide instruction. We're all on a learning curve right now. We're all really learning together and very much focused on improving our collective efficacy, which is, you know, by research, a high predictor of improved success for students, the collective efficacy of the educators.
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions about the hybrid model. Peter, you referenced that you don't expect the hybrid model to be in place for long term. So can you talk about the time frame that you're looking at for that?
Yeah, so the time frame that the regional superintendent group, again, it's Addison, Chittenden, and Franklin counties, which is kind of most of the state in terms of students. It's a big chunk. We agreed as a group to return within a 4 to 6 week window to look at the criteria I mentioned earlier to determine if we're ready to go to fully in person. Obviously, you know, I think we're prepared, and I've mentioned this a number of times, we're prepared for anything to happen this year, which is why we've spent so much time over the summer having a plan for what will happen in each phase of learning, as opposed to just preparing for the start of school. That reentry plan that we shared with the community a couple weeks ago, which you can find on our website under COVID reentry, drop down right on the webpage, outlines all of the 4 different phases, what it will look like, what transportation will look like. So we're ready to press play on any one of those phases throughout this year. The reason I don't think hybrid is going to last a long period of time is because I think either the conditions are going to be strong and continue to stay strong in Addison County and support more in-person learning. So in that 4 to 6 week window, assuming status quo, I think things look good for us to bring back our at least our K5, K6, pre-K5, pre-K6 students, or more students, depending on a number of factors that I mentioned earlier. Alternatively, if, like some states, we have a spike and, you know, we open up and all of a sudden things start to change, the most likely scenario is that we would have to move to remote as opposed to staying in hybrid. So that's why I don't think we're going to be staying in hybrid long term. You know, and as I said, our goal is to bring students back fully in person. And I mean, so far, I think Vermont has done an amazing job at staying green, and we need to. I'm hoping that continues. But we are prepared to move in whatever direction we need to.
Okay, this is a high school question. The academic calendar shows the high school graduation date is set for June 12th. Is this fixed, or is there a possibility that this will change for planning purposes?
I'm going to ask Peter, have we definitively got the 170 days?
So we don't yet definitively have that. That's going to take legislative action. And the last I heard, it was a couple weeks. So just to let everyone know, if you didn't see my communication on Friday, I shared a draft calendar which shows 170 student days. The governor's move of the school start date to the 8th, to this coming Tuesday, you know, essentially made it so that school districts, starting at their normal start date, which almost everybody did, it would make it harder or impossible actually to maintain 175 days with the later start date. So we've been told that this action will be happening, that there's full support for it. However, it has not yet happened. So the reason you see draft all over that calendar is because we're waiting to hear back. How that will impact if for some reason the legislature got back together and said, gosh, we're sticking with 175 and people will figure it out. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but if it does, we'll have to go back to the drawing board and potentially move some things around. I don't think that's likely, which is why we shared the draft. We think this is what's going to happen. We feel pretty confident, but we can't guarantee that yet. In terms of how that impacts the graduation date, normally graduation can be either kind of like towards the end of the year, or sometimes it's a week or two before. I mean, it's moved around a bit over the years. So I think it's probably, again, that's probably a date that I don't think will move. Justin, anything further on that?
No, I think my only caveat would be as you described, the 175 to 170. But I too feel confident that will be our graduation date, but we can't guarantee it yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would make tentative plans.
Okay. This is a health question. Kelly, can you talk a little bit about what the response looks like if a student, teacher, or staff member tests positive?
You're muted, Kelly.
She's getting there.
Okay.
Sorry. All right.
Sorry.
So if someone tests positive in one of our schools, as far as communication, that will be communicated to the entire district, and that communication will come from Peter. So everyone will know that that's happened. As far as what happens in the school, the area or any areas that that student had been in or that staff would be thoroughly cleaned. It would be shut down for 24 hours before being cleaned, but typically between the time that someone sent home and testing, that 24 hours would have passed. So thorough cleaning, and then the health department would be in touch with us looking for any contact tracing and trying to determine any close contacts to that student or staff. And every school will be keeping careful logs of where students are throughout the day, who they're in close contact with, and we'll be ready to provide that information to the health department so they can make those determinations, and they would be the ones to contact anyone who has been determined to be a close contact with the student. And then as far as steps beyond that, again, we don't know right now what would constitute closing down schools, things like that. It's unlikely one case would close down a school, but we don't have solid information on how that would happen, but that would be a joint decision with Peter and the health department and the Agency of Education, making those bigger decisions beyond kind of the cleaning and first steps.
Okay. Peter, would you like to talk more about the communication plan in general, both related, I don't know if you want to talk both related to positive cases, and also just talk a little bit about the COVID-19 website that we've created, and just about how we're going to gather information for folks and try to keep it cohesive in one place.
Yeah. So we realized in trying to provide information, and the need for information is so much greater now than it ever has been before. And when we're not communicating important information, there's a vacuum, and often that vacuum is filled with creation of trying to piece it together yourself when you don't have all the information. So that's why as we get closer to the school year, we've started to communicate weekly. We're going to continue that every Friday. We're also realizing that a lot of our communication and the way we live in schools tends to be by meetings and by dates. So if you're someone who's followed the school district for a while, you know that when you're looking for information, you have to think chronologically and think, okay, when did Brittany give that presentation on the budget? Was that December 1st or December 15th? Because that's where you're going to go back to that meeting to find the meeting materials to get that information. So we've kind of realized that like we have to break that kind of chronological way to find information because it's really hard to find. So the COVID-19 website that the Reentry tab that we've put on our site provides all of the communications that I'm doing by date, but also we're pulling things out of it to have in places so that can be accessed more easily. So we're going to be doing that throughout the year and kind of reorganizing information that's going out so that community members and families and students can go in and find things more easily. Part of the reentry plan, and if you haven't looked at the reentry plan, I really urge everyone to take a look at that. Again, it's on the website and that under that banner. It has 4 different areas that action teams engaged in critical work to prepare for the year. One of those was a communications action team, and they've provided the infrastructure this year that was led by Erica Garner. They created the infrastructure for us to follow this year to have really strong communication between school and home and district, and making sure that we're staying connected to families. Justin Campbell was on that action team, and maybe Justin, do you want to share a little bit more about the team's work?
Sure, as soon as I could unmute myself. Yeah, I was on the action team, and I think the communication action team, and I think a number of things really rose to the top for us. We wanted our communication to be really targeted to specific families, and different families have different means of communicating effectively with the school districts. So the ambassador program came out of that. So each family in the district will have a staff member assigned to them to kind of be their personal go-between for communication. We also, as Peter was saying, that's where many members of our committee really felt that it was important to have that one website resource where all the information could be found. They were finding, especially with kids in multiple schools, the number of emails and different notifications that were coming were really unmanageable, especially in this time.
Okay, so a request for clarification about students that attend on Thursday and Fridays. How do they know what to do on the 8th, or do they wait to start until the 10th?
Good question. I'm assuming that is, well, from the high school perspective, which I can provide, their teachers will be reaching out to them ahead of time to give them sort of a quick welcome and a little bit to do, but essentially their first day, that Thursday, Friday cohort, their first day in school will be Thursday the 10th, and that will kick off the bulk of their work. So teachers will reach out ahead of time, likely towards the end of this week, to provide some guidance. But we are going to have kind of 2 first days of school with our Monday, Tuesday cohort coming on the 8th, and the other cohort beginning on the 10th of September.
And Heather or Jen? Jen, go ahead.
I guess I would say for Mary Hogan, the plan is that we start on the 8th, that all students start on the 8th, and that if the students are in the hybrid model, what happens on the 8th may happen again on the 10th, just in terms of classroom routines that are specific to the classroom. But the stuff on the 8th and the 9th will be really like beginning of the year foundational things that teachers will be communicating to parents.
And then I think part of the question was if your student is starting in the Thursday, Friday cohort, would they be attending school on the 8th? And the first day of school would still be at the elementary level, the 8th, but it's going to look different. And I can't speak for exactly how it will be at every elementary school because there will be some slight building variations. What we are doing at Cornwall is teachers will be reaching out to students ahead of time. We are having an on-site welcome for those Thursday, Friday students on Friday of this week. And at that time, if students are there, then teachers will provide them with some activities and things to do, a way to connect with them on Tuesday and on Wednesday, and some things for them to do, much like what Jen talked about, setting up a routine at home, finding a place to work, answering some questions so that when they come back on Thursday, they will then talk about that and go through that with their teacher on site. There was one other thing I was going to mention that I think I just forgot. But the main thing is that oh, I know what it was. If students are not attending on that Friday, if they're not able to come, then the teacher will reach out directly to that family and provide that same information on how the teacher will connect with the student on Tuesday.
Great. So there are currently no open questions. Mary, is there anything that you would like, anything you would like to address at the board level?
You know, on behalf of the board, I want to thank the community and obviously the district, the teachers, the leadership, as we start this unprecedented school year. And it's going to be a year that we are all going to talk about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because the situations that we are going to continue to encounter are going to continue to be new ones that we are going to have to figure out each and every day. And so the patience and commitment that this community and leadership and teachers and staff have shown, it's exemplary. And I just want to thank everybody on behalf of the board for all that you're doing.
Absolutely. I think your speech inspired some more questions. So on the board level, has the timeline for the master plan changed at all given the current situation?
No, we've spoken about this and have discussed it in the Addy Indy, and we've collectively have discussed it at our board retreat, and I commented on in the newsletter as well. While these times are clearly, the challenges of these times are clearly unprecedented, challenging times are not. And we have to continue to push forward and push through this work. And, you know, we've been doing hard work for the past few years on the facilities master plan. There's still more work to be done, but now more than ever, we have to be prepared to ensure that we have the resources that we need to support kids and teachers as we move forward, and we will continue to move forward.
Thank you, Mary. We have a question about what happens in a classroom if we're not able to find a substitute for an absent teacher. I can talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been trying to do to you know, increase our sub pool. So we've been looking at having subs that are basically assigned a school so that we have some sort of folks that are on call, you know, whether or not we need them, but they are assigned to a specific building, and hiring some people specifically for those roles. We also will utilize our in-school staff if we're able. That includes paraeducators. And we have, you know, tried to do some more aggressive recruiting about subs with mixed success, but it's a challenge this year for many school districts. Jen looked like she had her hand raised. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I just think that we're going to be creative with the staffing that we have. If we can't find subs, it's not a situation that any of us would hope that we're in, but it's also happened in the past. You know, I certainly have substituted for the kindergarten teacher or the food service director. So these things happen on any given year. And so, you know, we'll figure it out.
That includes.
I would just add one thing. I would echo what Jen said. That's something we deal with any year. Certainly, we can imagine scenarios where we're looking for more subs than normal. But I've certainly also taught classes, and I think really everyone in the building is used to pitching in. It's a real team environment.
And we're continuing to work with Middlebury College, and there's potential opportunities there. I heard recently, and I haven't had a chance to share this with the board yet, but there's now the ability for the board potentially to sub. So Mary, Victoria, get ready. I just have to send a letter to Dan French, and board members can do that. So that's kind of exciting. That is, though, I mean, I mentioned staffing before as one of the indicators, one of the criteria that we're going to use to assess going fully in person. And I think one of the things we don't know yet, and maybe Kelly could speak to this a little bit, because I think this is going to hit home for all of us in the community. There are certain requirements when a student is showing symptoms, and it could be one symptom, not all of the symptoms together, in terms of quarantining. And that the biggest concern that I'm hearing from districts throughout the state is, as those students and staff are quarantining because they have a runny nose or running a fever, or the things that we all normally do in any given year, that's going to have an impact on our staffing. We have no idea what that's going to look like. But Kelly, can you talk a little bit about what that process looks like for folks so that they can understand that a bit more?
I can, yeah. And our guidelines actually have some new information that we didn't have before in them. So if folks wanted to look on there was a statewide or a state level coalition that worked to put together an algorithm to guide us on what to do in these cases. And the goal was to minimize the time that students and staff are out of school or in-person learning and work, but also not to bring anyone back while they're still contagious. So there's a very detailed algorithm that gives us some pretty clear guidance on these things. And it really depends on the symptom or symptoms. It depends on whether you've been exposed to someone with COVID, if you've engaged in high-risk travel. All of that weighs into how long someone's going to be out of school. At a minimum, there's a list of symptoms that don't include a cough, say sore throat or a fever or muscle aches, things like that. If a student or a staff has a symptom like that, just one, you'll get sent home. And if it resolves within 24 hours, not COVID related, you can come right back to school. And so that piece I think is really great, because that's also going to minimize kind of us saturating the healthcare providers with visits. That was another reason for this algorithm, because if we were sending every student that we send home with these symptoms to their healthcare provider, they would be inundated and just not be able to keep up. So that's kind of the minimum. And then it just progresses from there. Really, any symptom that lasts more than 24 hours, the guidance is to contact a healthcare provider. And then it goes from there. Different scenarios, you'll get tested, others you won't, you'll just wait it out, things like that. So, but there is more detail, and I created a chart, more of a narrative chart, to interpret some of the information in that algorithm. So it's still a bit complicated just because there are many different scenarios, but it's nice to have that guidance.
Thank you, Kelly.
Sure.
There's a question here about air ventilation, and if that's been addressed across the district. I can talk about that a little bit. We have done a pretty extensive amount of work on the HVAC systems in the schools. Each school had, a different condition that the HVAC was in, so there was different work done at different schools, but some of the schools had work done on their controls, so to be able to control them remotely and have more control over like the level of air exchange, and to view all that remotely and make sure that it's working well. Some schools also had like filtration systems installed, and HEPA filters and things like that to filter out airborne particles. Efficiency Vermont was allocated some funding through the legislature through the coronavirus relief funds, which is able to help with some of that cost. but it's something that is also going to be ongoing. It's a lot of work that, you know, we'll continue to work on throughout the school year, but there's been a lot of progress throughout the summer. Kelly, can you address the handling of seasonal allergy symptoms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that list of symptoms we know could account for many, many other things, including the common cold, stomach bugs, the flu, different things, something like nasal congestion. It actually says in the guidance, you know, not related to allergies. So if we've determined that someone has a documented allergy, seasonal allergy, and a student presents to the nurse with a clear runny nose and itchy watery eyes, things like that, we'll make that assessment and determine if it seems to be allergy related. If they have a fever and a green runny nose, that'll be a different story, things like that. So those will be individual assessments that the nurses will be making. If it's something that a student has, the parent knows that, they've been diagnosed with it, and they have those symptoms in the morning, and then you can send your student to school, but just give the nurse a heads up. That way we can be aware of that, things like that. That would be important for us to know. But some of those symptoms certainly do have an aside where it states, you know, either not explained by another diagnosis. Another one is a headache. Students may have migraine headaches, tension headaches, and it's something that they suffer with on a regular basis. Something like that, we would appreciate notes from doctors and just knowing about it. And then again, we'd have to make those assessments, whether it's just their normal diagnosed headache or if this could be COVID related. So, and that's where the nurses will come into play and help figure those things out.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm just giving folks a minute or two to get some last questions in before I hand it back to Peter. Principals, could you talk a bit about how extracurriculars are going to work, at least in the fall, in your schools, extracurricular activities, including sports, starting with Justin?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the sports season is happening. As we mentioned earlier, the athletes will be wearing masks. The biggest change I would say is to football, which really has been changed quite substantially. So all those involved in the program are aware of it. It's a 7v7 format. Other co-curricular activities, theater, performing arts, etc., again, are happening, though in pretty substantially changed formats as needed. For the performing arts, you know, singing and playing certain instruments, anything that would cause respiratory droplets to be expelled into the air in large quantities, those will need to happen differently. So our choral programs, our theater programs are really doing a lot of good planning on how they can utilize technology and revise curricula to really continue to reach students. So that's all underway.
Thank you. And then at the elementary level, Jen?
We really don't have extracurricular activities. So, you know, I feel like the impact is negligible.
Okay.
The same.
Thank you. This is a question for the board. Can you speak about the concept of equity when thinking about school consolidation in terms of the facility master plan? Mary, we're not able to hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted though.
How's that?
There you go.
I think the concept of equity as it relates to the facilities master plan is an underlying principle. It is the idea that is really rooted in the work, ensuring that we recognize that there's a difference between equal and equitable, but that we need to ensure that the resources needed by students to have access to the types of learning opportunities that we say are available in this district, that we are able to provide those resources in an equitable way. And so when we think about the facilities master plan, we need to make sure that as we think about the resources in the district, what do the facilities, how can they, and the way that we manage them, the way that we operate them, the cost that we incur, the resources that they embody, how can we look at the facilities as a way to continue to invest in an equitable manner across the district? And so it's one cog in that wheel of all of the things that you have to think about when you're providing resources to a school district so that they can do the work in an equitable fashion. So as a concept in the facilities master plan, I think it's an underlying principle. And we're going to continue, and Peter can speak to this as well, we continue to work as a district in that definition and in that communication and how you bring that thinking to everyday life in a classroom for a kid. And I think, Peter and the leadership team and the staff across the district, we're continuing to put more work in making that be a very palatable thing in our district and in our classroom.
Thanks, Mary. Can you talk a little bit, or perhaps Peter, talk a little bit about what you said about equal versus equitable?
Sure. I always think about it in a way in which, as an organization, you say, this is the type of learning environment that we believe is appropriate for our kids. And a kid could have, could be starting here with regards to needs or opportunity to reach that level. Another kid could be starting here with regard to opportunities or resources to reach that level, and another student could be starting here. Our job is to ensure that we're providing equal opportunity for those kids, even though their needs are very, very different. And so it's not that what we're providing is equal, because each of those kids have very different needs, but they all have the opportunity in an equitable way to achieve those goals.
Yeah, I guess I would add, just thinking historically about where we are, or where we've been, and this conversation has come up this year across our 7 elementary schools, as we realize some of the work that we've done since unifying to, around that the lens of equitable versus equal, and thinking about what our community's previous districts invested in and didn't invest in, and the work that is left to do to really determine what the needs are. Again, equity to me, and I think to us, is the money flows, the resources flow to those that need it. And it's not, everyone is not getting the same thing, everyone's getting what they need. I think as we look at the question about what is equity and how do we view equity, and I think that's a conversation that the community has had for a long time. It's one that we're launching into from the instructional and operational side of ACSD as we finish our final strategic plan, or the final year, of our strategic plan this past year. This year, we're going to be building a strategic plan for equity. We've got incredible work that's happening, and we want to continue to look at it through that lens of equity. So I think it's something, it's a great question. We need to continue to grapple with it. And we need to also, I think, as a community which has the greatest income diversity of anywhere in Vermont. We also need to recognize who we are and that our communities are fairly stratified. And if you look at our elementary schools, they're also reflective of the communities within each town. So that is, I think that question has come during the facilities master planning process to the board and asking, how are you going to prioritize equity in terms of not grouping students according to socioeconomic status, for example. So I think these are things that as a community we need to be grappling with. The master plan certainly is a door into some of these greater community-wide issues. They're not just school issues. They're obviously well beyond school as well. But those are all factors that come into the decision making we have to make, I think, in the years ahead, as Mary said, as the financial picture becomes tighter and narrower. We've been talking about the excess spending threshold for a couple of years, and the fact that this past year we hit the excess spending threshold, and with the 3.5% increases we generally see, we're going to be above the threshold in the following year. That's not talking about COVID and the impact of the pandemic on the economy, on the state ed fund, and ultimately on what we're going to be able to spend. So maximizing the resources that we will have, providing for the most for every student is our priority. And I think I believe that we're on the track and we're doing it together.
Okay. Peter,
Moderator, we've got 2 minutes left.
We've got 2 minutes. So do you want to just close out by sort of talking about what's coming up in the next, couple of months? Some of the
school's coming up.
What the next steps might be in terms of the facilities master plan.
Sure. So that, as Mary mentioned, the facilities master planning process is underway. There are porch conversations that are being scheduled right now, and the board and I will be traveling around to different homes to have conversations with different folks about the district, about the process, everything and anything probably. And lots of other outreach is happening. The study itself is continuing. And so the facilities committee is leading the charge on that. Victoria, anything you want to share from the facilities committee?
I think you've covered it pretty well. Sorry, I stepped out right as the facilities questions were asked, but there was a cooking disaster occurring in the kitchen that required some intervention. So I apologize for that. I guess the porch conversation is an important part of the work going forward. In this new environment, we are continuing to seek new ways to engage with the community and get their feedback and answer questions. I think tonight is a great example of that. And as we stated in the last facilities meeting, we are hoping to have a rough or a consumable draft by the new year and a completed document by town meeting day. Other than that, I think you covered it.
Thank you, Victoria. So we are at our time here. As I said, MCTV is recording this, and when they get that link, we'll get it up on our website. And thank you for joining us tonight.
So yeah, I just want to reiterate, thank you to Brittany for moderating. Well done.
Great job, Brittany.
And yeah, thanks everyone for attending. We look forward to engaging over the weeks, months, and years ahead. Reach out if you have questions. We are all available, and look forward to doing this with all of you together. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.